Morning. Or he was here with me, and then he decided he didn't want to be here with me anymore. I don't know why. He's a jerk. He was here with me, and then he decided he didn't want to be here with me anymore. But we'll start here in a few minutes, just to give, if there's extra other people that want to get on, I want to give them time to get on. I don't know how many people will get on. I just know my husband and I have to shovel our driveway, and I have to make dinner. So I figured now would be better than later. But it's always nice because the stream does stay up, so even if people can't get to it right away, that's fine. So you get to watch me drink tea. I guess I could knit for you. I'm the most awkward streamer in the world. I totally accept that. Mort. Mort, come here. Such a jerk. All right, let's get started. That way you guys can be done with your homework for me. Maybe we'll do one of these tomorrow if we don't have school, like midday. I mean, I'm sure the beauty of snow days is that you don't have to hang out with me, but we could at least get the reading done together if we're not here, or if we're not at school tomorrow. I don't know yet. Yeah, Mort, come here. Come on. All right, guys. So you're going to want to open up to page 267 if you are not already there. Come here. Come on. Just so you guys do know that I did post the links for our unit test essay to Google Classroom. So make sure that you check that out if you have not already been there. There's 3, I believe, so just pick your favorite one and prepare that one. All right. Chapter 20, these are the closing arguments for the trial, and then we'll also get the verdict for the trial today. We're reading about 23 pages. It shouldn't take me long. We should be done in a half hour if you're listening. But let's do it. Actually, we're going to read 3 chapters today. We're going to read up through 22. So I lied. My live stream is wrong. All right. Come on round here, son. I got something that'll settle your stomach. As Mr. Dolphus Raymond was an evil man, I accepted his invitation reluctantly, but I followed Dill. Somehow, I didn't think Atticus would have liked it if we became friendly with Mr. Raymond, and I knew Aunt Alexandra wouldn't. Here, he said, offering Dill his paper sack with straws in it. Take a good sip. It'll quieten you. Dill sucked on straws, smiled, and pulled at length. Hee, said Mr. Raymond, evidently taking delight in corrupting a child. Dill, you watch out now, I warned. Dill released the straws and grinned. Scout, it's nothing but Coca-Cola. Mr. Raymond sat up against the tree trunk. He had been lying on the grass. You little folks won't tell on me now, will you? It'd ruin my reputation if you did. You mean all you drink in that sack is Coca-Cola? Just plain old Coca-Cola? Yes, ma'am, Mr. Raymond nodded. I liked his smell. It was like leather, horses, and cottonseed. He wore only English riding boots I'd ever seen. That's all I drink most of the time. Then you just pretend you're half... I beg your pardon, sorry, I caught myself. I didn't mean to be. Mr. Raymond chuckled, not at all offended, and I tried to frame a discreet question. Why do you do like you do? Well, oh yes. You mean, why do I pretend? Well, it's very simple, he said. Some folks don't like the way I live. Now, I could say to hell with them. I don't care what they like. I do say I don't care if they don't like it, right enough. But I don't say to hell with them, you see. Dill and I said, no, sir. I try to give them a reason, you see. It helps folks if they can latch onto a reason. When I come to town, which is seldom, if I weave a little and drink out of this sack, folks say Dolphin Raymond's in the clutches of whiskey. That's why he won't change his ways. He can't help himself. That's why he lives the way that he does. That ain't the matter. That ain't honest, Mr. Raymond, making yourself out badder than you already are. It ain't honest, but it's mighty helpful to folks. Secretly, Miss Finch, I'm not much of a drinker, but you see, they could never understand that I live like that, like I do, because that's the way I want to live. I had a feeling that I shouldn't be here listening to this sinful man who had mixed children and didn't care who knew it, but he was fascinating. I had never encountered a being so deliberately perpetuated fraud who deliberately perpetuated fraud against himself. But why had he entrusted us with his deepest secret? And I asked him. Because you're children, and you can understand it, he said. And because I heard that one. He jerked his head at Dill. Things haven't caught up with that one's instinct yet. Let him get a little older and he won't get sick and cry. Maybe things will strike him as being not quite right, say, but he won't cry, not when he gets a few years on him. Cry about what, Mr. Raymond? Dill's maleness was beginning to assert himself. Cry about the simple help people give one another, even without thinking. Cry about the hell white people give colored folks without stopping to think that they're people too. Atticus says cheating a colored man is 10 times worse than cheating a white man, I muttered. Says it's the worst thing that you can do. Mr. Raymond said, I don't reckon it's Miss Jean Louise. You don't know your pa's not a you don't know your pa's not a run-of-the-mill man. It'll take a few years for that to sink in. You haven't even seen enough of the world yet. You haven't even seen this town. But all you got to do is step back inside that courthouse. Which reminded me that we were missing nearly of all of Mr. Gilmer's cross-examination. I looked at the sun. It was dropping fast behind the store tops on the west side of the square. Between two fires, I could not decide what I wanted to jump into, Mr. Raymond or the 5th Judicial Circuit Court. Come on, Dill, I said. You all right now? Yeah, glad to have met you, Mr. Raymond. And thanks for the drink. It was mighty settling. We raced back to the courthouse and up to the steps, up 2 flights of stairs, and edged our ways along the balcony rail. Reverend Skies had saved our seats. The courtroom was still, and again I wondered where the babies were. Judge Taylor's cigar was a brown speck in the center of his mouth. Mr. Gilmer was writing on one of the yellow pads of on his table, trying to outdo the court reporter, whose hand was jerking rapidly. Shoot, I muttered. We missed it. Atticus was halfway through his speech to the jury. He had evidently pulled some papers from his briefcase that rested beside his chair. Because they were on his table, Tom Robinson was toying with them. Absence of any corroborative evidence, this man was indicted on a capital charge and is now on trial for his life. I punched Jim. How long's he been at it? He's just gone over the evidence, Jim whispered. And we're going to win, Scout. I don't see how we can't. He's been at it for about 5 minutes. He made it as plain and as easy as well as I could explain it to you. You could have understood it even. Did Mr. Gilmer? Shh, nothing new, just the usual. Hush now. We looked down again at Atticus. Atticus was speaking easily with the kind of detachment he used when he dictated a letter. He walked slowly up and down in front of the jury, and the jury seemed to be attentive. Their heads were up, and they followed Atticus's route, which seemed to be appreciation. I guess it was because Atticus wasn't a thunderer. Atticus paused, then he did something he didn't ordinarily do. He unhitched his watch and chain and placed them on the table, saying, "With the court's permission." Judge Taylor nodded, and then Atticus did something I never saw him do before or since, in public or in private. He unbuttoned his vest, unbuttoned his collar, loosened his tie, took off his coat. He never loosened a scrap of his clothing until he undressed at bedtime, and to Jem and me this was the equivalent of him standing before us, stark naked. We exchanged horrified glances. Atticus put his hands in his pockets, and as he returned to the jury, I saw his gold collar button and the tips of his pencil and pen winking in the light. "Gentlemen," he said. Jem and I looked at each other. Atticus might have said "Scout." His voice had lost its aridity, its detachment. He was talking to the jury as if they were the folks on the post office corner. "Gentlemen," he was saying, "I shall be brief, but would like to use my remaining time with you to remind you that this case is not a difficult one. It requires no minutes of sifting of complicated facts, but it does require you to be sure beyond all measure of a reasonable doubt as to the guilt of this defendant. To begin with, this case should have never come to trial. This case is as simple as black and white. The state has not produced one iota of medical evidence to the effect that the crime Tom Robinson is charged with ever took place. It has relied instead upon the testimony of 2 witnesses whose evidence has not only been called into serious question on cross-examination, but has been flatly contradicted by the defendant." Wait, come on, bud. Okay. "The defendant is not guilty, but somebody in this courtroom is. I have nothing but pity in my heart for the chief witnesses of the state, but the pity does not extend as so far to putting a man's life at stake, which she has done in effort to get rid of her own guilt. I say guilt, gentlemen, because it was guilt that motivated her. She has committed no crime. She has merely broken a rigid and time-honored code of our society, a code so severe that whoever breaks it is hounded from our midst until as unfit to live with. She is the victim of cruel poverty and ignorance, but I cannot pity her. She is white. She knew full well the enormity of her defense, but because her desires were stronger than the code she was breaking, she persisted in breaking it. She persisted, and her subsequent reaction is something that all of us have known at one time or another. She did something that every child has done. She tried to put evidence of her offense away from her, But in this case, she was no child hiding stolen contraband. She struck out at her victim of necessity. She must put him away from her. He must be removed from her presence, from this world. She must destroy the evidence. What was the evidence of her offense? Tom Robinson, a human being. She must put Tom Robinson away from her. Tom Robinson was her daily reminder of what she did. And what did she do? She tempted a Negro. She was white. She tempted a Negro. She did something that in our society is considered unspeakable. She kissed a black man. Not an old uncle, but a strong, young Negro man. No code mattered to her before she broke it, but it came crashing down on her afterwards. Her father saw it, and the defendant has testified as to his remarks. What did her father do? We don't know, but there is circumstantial evidence to indicate that Mayella Ewell was beaten savagely by someone who led almost exclusively with his left. We do know in part that what Mr. Ewell did. He did what any God-fearing, persevering, respectable white man would do under the circumstances. He swore out a warrant, no doubt signing it with his left hand, and Tom Robinson now sits before you having taken the oath with the only good hand he possesses, his right. And so a quiet, respectable, humble Negro who has been mitigated temerity to feel sorry for a white woman, who has the unmitigated temerity to feel sorry for a white woman, has had to put his word against two white peoples. I need not remind you of their appearance and conduct on the stand. You saw before them yourselves. The witnesses of the state, with the exception of the sheriff of Macomb County, have presented themselves to you, gentlemen, to this court, in the cynical confidence that their testimony would not be doubted, confident that you gentlemen would go along with them, with the assumption, that evil assumption, that all Negroes lie, that all Negroes are basically immoral beings, that all Negroes are not to be trusted around our women, an assumption one associates with minds of their caliber, which, gentlemen, we know in itself is a lie as black as Tom Robinson's skin, a lie I do not have to point out to you. You know the truth, and the truth is this. Some Negroes lie, some Negroes are immoral, some Negro men are not to be trusted around women, black or white. But this is not the truth that applies, but this is a truth that applies to the human race and to no particular race of man. There is not a person in this courtroom who has never told a lie, who has never done an immoral thing, and there is no man living who has never looked upon a woman without desire. Atticus paused and took out his handkerchief, then he took off his glasses and wiped them, and we saw another first. We had never seen him sweat. He was one of those men whose faces never perspired, but now it was shining tan. One more thing, gentlemen, before I quit. Thomas Jefferson once said that all men are created equal. Phrase the Yankees and the distaff side of the executive branch in Washington are fond of hurling at us. There is a tendency in this year of grace of 1935 for certain people to use this phrase out of context to satisfy all conditions. The most ridiculous example I could think of is that people who run public education promote the stupid and idle along with the industrious because all men are created equal. Educators will gravely tell you the children left behind suffer terrible feelings of inferiority. We know that all men are not created equal in the sense that some people would have us believe. Some people are smarter than others. Some people have more opportunity because they are born with it. Some men make more money than others. Some women make better cakes than others. Some people are born gifted beyond the normal scope of most men. But there is one way in this country in which all men are created equal. There is one human institution that makes us a pauper to the equal of Rockefeller, the stupid man the equal of Einstein, and the ignorant man the equal of any college president. That institution, gentlemen, is a court. It can be the Supreme Court of the United States or the humblest JP court in the land, or this honorable court which you serve. Our courts have their faults, as does any human institution, but in this country, our courts are the great levelers, and in our courts, all men are created equal. I am no idealist to believe firmly in the integrity of our courts and in the jury system. There is no ideal to me. It is a living, working reality, gentlemen. A court is no better than each man of you sitting before me on this jury. A court is only as good as it sounds, and a jury is only as sound as the men who make it up. I am confident that you gentlemen will review without passion the evidence you have heard, come to a decision, and restore this defendant to his family in the name of God. Do your duty. Atticus's voice had dropped as he turned away from the jury. He said something I did not catch. He said it more to himself than to the court. I punched Jem. What did he say? In the name of God, believe him. I think that's what he said. Dill suddenly reached over and tugged at Jem. Look yonder. We followed his finger with sinking hearts. Calpurnia was making her way towards the middle aisle, walking straight toward Atticus. Chapter 21. She stopped shyly at the railing and waited to get Judge Taylor's attention. She was in a fresh apron and carried an envelope in her hand. Judge Taylor saw her and said, "It's Calpurnia, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," she said. "Could I just pass this note to Mr. Finch, please? It's got something to do with the trial." Judge Taylor nodded, and Atticus took the envelope from Calpurnia. He opened it, read its contents, and said, "Judge, this note is for my sister. She says the children are missing. Haven't turned up since noon. Could you?" "I know where they are, Mr. Atticus." Mr. Underwood spoke up. "They're right up yonder in the colored balcony. Been there since precisely 1:18 p.m. Her father turned around and looked up. Jem, come down from there, he called. When he said something to the judge we didn't hear, we climbed across Reverend Skies and made our way to the staircase. Atticus and Calpurnia met us downstairs. Calpurnia looked peeved, but Atticus looked exhausted. Jem was jumping in excitement. "We won, haven't we?" "I have no idea," said Atticus shortly. "You've been here all afternoon. Go home with Calpurnia and get your supper, and stay home." "Oh, Atticus, let us come back," pleaded Jem. "Please let us hear the verdict. Please, sir. The jury might be out and back in a minute. We don't know." But we could tell Atticus was relenting. "Well, you've heard it all, so you might as well hear the rest. Tell you what, you can come back when you've eaten your supper. Eat slowly now. You won't be missing anything important. And if the jury's still out, you can wait with us. But I expect it to be over before you get back." "You think they'll acquit him that fast?" asked Jem. Atticus opened his mouth to answer, but shut it and left us. I prayed that Reverend Skies would have our seats for us, but stopped praying when I remembered that people got up and left in droves when the jury was out. Tonight they'd overrun the drugstore and the OK Cafe and the hotel, that is, unless they brought their suppers too. Calpurnia marched us home. "Skin every one of you alive. The very idea you children will listen to all that. Mr. Jem, don't you know better than to take your little sister out to that trial? Miss Alexandra absolutely have a stroke of paralysis when she finds out. Ain't fitting for children to hear." The streetlights were on, and we glimpsed at Calpurnia's indignant profile as we passed beneath them. "Mr. Jem, I thought you was getting some kind of head on your shoulders. The very idea. She's your little sister. The very idea, sir. You ought to be perfectly ashamed of yourself. Ain't you got any sense at all?" I was exhilarated. So many things had happened so fast that I felt it would take years to sort them out. And now here was Calpurnia giving her precious Jem down the country. What new marvels would this evening bring? Jem was chuckling. "Don't you want to hear about it, Cal?" "Hush your mouth, sir, when you ought to be hanging your head in shame going along laughing." Calpurnia received a series of rusty threats that moved Jem to little remorse, and she sailed up the front steps with her classic, "If Mr. Finch don't wear you out, I'll get you. I will get in that house, sir." Jem went in grinning, and Calpurnia nodded tacit consent to having Dill in for supper. "You all call Miss Rachel right now and you tell her where you are," she said. "She's running distracted, looking for you. You watch out that she don't ship you back to Meriden first thing in the morning." Aunt Alexandra met us and nearly fainted when Calpurnia told us where we were. I guess it hurt her when we told her Atticus said we could go back, because she didn't say a word during supper. She had just arranged food on her plate, looked at it sadly while Calpurnia served Jem, Dill and me with a vengeance. Calpurnia served Jem, Dill, and me with vengeance. Calpurnia poured milk, dished out potato salad and ham, muttered, "Shame on yourselves," in varying degrees of intensity. "Now you all eat slow," was her final command. Reverend Skies had saved our places. We were surprised to find that we'd been gone nearly an hour, and were equally surprised to find the courtroom exactly as we had left it, with minor changes. The jury box was now empty. The defendant was gone. Judge Taylor had been gone, but had reappeared, and we were seating ourselves. "Nobody's moved, hardly," said Jem. "They moved around some when the jury went out," said Reverend Skies. "The men folk down there got the women folk their suppers, and they fed their babies." "How long you been out?" asked Jem. "About 30 minutes. "How long have they been out?" asked Jem. "About 30 minutes. Mr. Finch and Mr. Gilmer did some more talking, and Judge Taylor charged the jury." "How was he?" asked Jem. "What say? Oh, he did all right. I ain't complaining one bit. He was mighty fair-minded. He sort of said, if you believe this, then you'll have to return one verdict, but if you believe this, you'll have to return another verdict. And I thought he was leaning a little on our side," said Reverend Skies. Jem smiled. "He is not supposed to lean, Reverend. We don't fret We've won it, he said wisely. Don't see how any jury could convict after what they heard. Now, don't you be so confident, Mr. Jem. I ain't ever seen any jury decide in favor of a colored man over a white man. But Jem took exception to Reverend Skies, and we were subjected in lengthy to review of the evidence with Jem's ideas on law regarding rape. It wasn't rape if she let you, but she had to be 18, in Alabama that is, and Mayla was 19. Apparently you had to kick and holler and had to be overpowered and stomped on, preferably knocked out stone cold, if you were under 18, and you didn't have to go through all this. Sorry, there's someone in my yard because their boxer puppy has gotten out, and so now I've got, I think, some woman I've never talked to in my yard. And she's gone. Okay, sorry. Mr. Jem, Reverend Skies demurred. This ain't a polite thing for ladies to hear. Aw, she don't know what we're talking about, said Jem. Scout, this is too cold. This is too old for you, ain't it? It most certainly is not. I know every word you're saying. Perhaps I was too convincing, because Jem hushed, never discussed the subject again. What time is it, Reverend? He asked, getting on toward 8. I looked down and saw Atticus strolling around with his hands in his pocket. He made a tour of the windows, walked by the railing over the jury box. He looked in, inspected Judge Taylor on his throne, and went back to where he started. I caught his eye and waved to him. He acknowledged my salute with a nod and resumed his tour. Mr. Gilmore was standing at the windows talking to Mr. Underwood. Bert, the court reporter, was chain-smoking. He sat back with his feet on the table. But the officers of the court, the ones present, Atticus, Mr. Gilmer, Judge Taylor, sound asleep, and Bert, were the only ones whose behavior seemed normal. I had never seen a packed courtroom so still. Sometimes a baby would cry out fretfully and a child would scurry out. But the grown people sat as if they were in church. In the balcony, the Negroes sat and stood around us with biblical patience. The old courthouse clock suffered its preliminary strain and struck the hour, 8 deafening bongs that shook our bones. When it bonged 11 times, I was past feeling. Tired from fighting sleep, I allowed myself a short nap against Reverend Sky's comfortable arm and shoulder. I jerked awake and made an honest effort to remain so by looking down and concentrating on our heads below. There were 16 bald ones, 14 men that could pass for redheads, 40 heads varying between brown and black hair, and I remembered something Jem had once explained to me when he went through a brief period of physical research. He said if enough people, a stadium full maybe, were to concentrate on one thing, such as setting a tree afire in the woods, that the tree would ignite of its own accord. I toyed with the idea of asking everyone below to concentrate on setting Tom Robinson free, but thought if we were as tired as I was, it wouldn't work. Dill was sound asleep, his head on Jem's shoulder, and Jem was quiet. Ain't it a long time, I asked him. Sure is, Scouty said happily. Well, from the way you put it, it would just take 5 minutes. Jem raised his eyebrows. There are things you don't understand, he said. I was too weary to argue. But I must have been reasonably awake, or I would have not received the impression that was creeping into me. It was not unlike the one I had last winter, and I shivered. Though the night was hot, the feeling grew until the atmosphere in the courtroom was exactly the same as that cold February morning when mockingbirds are still, and carpenters had stopped hammering on Miss Maudie's new house, and every wood door in the neighborhood was shut as tight as the doors of the Radley place. A deserted, waiting, empty street, and the courtroom was packed with people. A steaming summer night was no different from a winter morning. Mr. Heck Tate, who had entered the courtroom, was talking to Atticus, might have been wearing his high boots in lumberjacket. Atticus had stopped his tranquil journey and put his foot onto the bottom rung of a chair as he listened to what Mr. Tate was saying. He ran his hands slowly up and down his thigh. I expected Mr. Tate to say any minute, "Take him, Mr. Finch." But Mr. Tate said, "This court will come to order," in a voice that rang with authority, and the heads below us jerked. Mr. Tate left the room and returned with Tom Robinson. He steered Tom to his place beside Atticus and stood there. Judge Taylor had roused himself to sudden alertness and was sitting up straight looking at the empty jury box. What happened after that was of dreamlike quality. In a dream, I saw the jury return, moving like underwater swimmers, and Judge Taylor's voice came from far away, and he was tiny. I saw something that only a lawyer's child could be expected to see, could be expected to watch for, and it was like watching Atticus walk into the street, raise a rifle to his shoulder, and pull on his trigger, but watching all that time knowing that the gun was empty. A jury never looks at the defendant if he's been convicted, and when the jury came in, not one of them looked at Tom. foreman handed a piece of paper to Mr. Tate, who handed it to the clerk, who handed it to the judge. I shut my eyes. Judge Taylor was polling the jury. Guilty, 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 guilty. I peeked at Jem. His hands were white from gripping the balcony rail, and his shoulders jerked as if each guilty was a separate stab between them. Judge Taylor was saying something. His gavel was in his fist, but he wasn't using it. Dimly, I saw Atticus pushing papers from the table into his briefcase. He snapped it shut, went to the court reporter and said something, nodded to Mr. Gilmer, and then went to Tom Robinson and whispered something to him. Atticus put his hand on Tom's shoulder as he whispered. Atticus took his coat off the back of the chair and pulled it over his shoulder. Then he left the courtroom, but not by his usual exit. He must have wanted to go home the short way, because he walked quickly down the middle aisle toward the south exit. I followed the top of his head as he made his way through the door. He did not look up. Someone was punching me, but I was reluctant to take my eyes from the people below, and in the image of Atticus's lonely walk down the aisle, Miss Jean Louise, I looked up. They were standing, all around us, and in the balcony on the opposite wall, the Negroes were getting to their feet. Reverend Sky's voice was as distant as Judge Taylor's. Miss Jean Louise, stand up. Your father's passing. Chapter 22. So we've got about 5 more pages to go. It was Jem's turn to cry. His face was streaked with angry tears as we made our way through that cheerful crowd. It ain't right, he muttered, all the way to the corner of the square where we found Atticus waiting. Atticus was standing under a streetlight looking up as though nothing had happened. His vest was buttoned, his collar and tie neatly in place. His watch chain glistened. He was his impassive self again. It ain't right, Atticus, said Jem. No, son, it's not right. We walked home. Aunt Alexandra was waiting. She was in her dressing gown, and I could have sworn she had a corset on underneath. I'm sorry, brother, she murmured. Having never heard her call Atticus brother before, I stole a glance at Jem, but he was not listening. I looked up at Atticus, then down at the floor, and I wondered if he thought Atticus was somehow responsible for Tom Robinson's conviction. Is he all right? Auntie asked, indicating Jem. He'll be so presently, said Atticus. It was a little too strong for him. Our father sighed. I'm going to bed, he said. If I don't wake up in the morning, don't call me. I didn't think it wise in the first place to let them. This is their home, sister, said Atticus. We've made it this way for them. They might as well learn to cope with it. Well, they don't have to go to the courthouse and wallow in it. It's just as much Macomb County as missionary teas. Atticus, Aunt Alexandra's eyes were anxious. You are the last person I thought that would turn bitter over this. I'm not bitter. I'm just tired. I'm going to bed. Atticus, said Jem bleakly. He turned in the doorway. What, son? How could they do it? How could they? I don't know, but they did it. They've done it before, and they did it tonight, and they'll do it again when they do it. Seems that only children weep. Good night. But things are always better in the morning. Atticus rose in his usual ungodly hour and was in the living room behind the mobile register when we stumbled in. Jem's morning face posed the question his sleepy lips struggled to ask. It's not time to worry yet, Atticus reassured him, and we went to the dining room. We're not through yet. Well, there'll be an appeal, and we can count on that. Gracious alive, Cal, what is all this? He was staring at his breakfast plate. Calpurnia said, Tom Robinson's daddy sent you along this chicken this morning, so I fixed it. You tell him I'm proud to get it, but they don't have chicken for breakfast at the White House. What are these? Rolls, said Calpurnia. Estelle down at the hotel sent them. Atticus looked at her puzzled, and she said, You better step on out here and see what's in the kitchen, Mr. Finch. We followed him. The kitchen table was loaded with enough food to bury the family. Hunks of salt pork, tomatoes, beans, even scoopernogs. Atticus grinned when he found a jar of pickled pig's knuckles. Reckon Auntie'll let me eat these in the dining room? Calpurnia said, This was all around the back steps when I got here this morning. They appreciate what you did, Mr. Finch. They aren't overstepping themselves, are they? Hi, Josh.
Hi.
You want to wave?
No.
Come on. You're such a weirdo. They were curious if you'd ever make an appearance. I'll turn this computer back on you. Sorry guys, I'm on page 286. They aren't overstepping themselves, are they? Atticus's eyes filled with tears, and he did not speak for a moment. Tell them I am very grateful, he said. Tell them Tell them they must never do this again. Times are too hard. He left the kitchen, went to the dining room, and excused himself to Aunt Alexandra, put on his hat, and went to town. We heard Dill's steps on the hall, so Calpurnia left Atticus's uneaten breakfast on the table. Between rabbit bites, Dill told us of Miss Rachel's reaction last night, which was, if a man like Atticus Finch wants to butt his head against a stone wall, it's his head. I'd have got her told, growled Dill, gnawing at his chicken leg, but she didn't look much like telling this morning. She said she was half up the night wondering where I was and that she'd had the sheriff after me, but he was at the hearing. Dill, you've got to stop going off without telling her. It just aggravates her. Dill sighed patiently, and I told her till I was blue in the face where I was going. She's just seen too many snakes in the closet. Bet that woman drinks a pint for breakfast every morning. No, she drinks 2 glasses full. Seen her. Don't talk like that, Dill, said Aunt Alexandra. It's not becoming of a child. It's cynical. It ain't cynical, Miss Alexandra. It's telling the truth. Telling the truth's not cynical, is it? The way you tell it, it is. Jem eyes flashed at her, but he said to Dill, let's go. You can take that runner with you. We went to the front porch. Miss Stephanie Crawford was busy telling it to Miss Maudie Atkinson and Mr. Avery. They looked around at us and went on talking. Jem made a feral noise in his throat. I wished for a weapon. I hate grown folks looking at you, said Dill. Makes you feel like you've done something wrong. Miss Maudie yelled for Jem Finch to come here. Jem groaned and heaved himself up from the swing. We'll go with you, Dill said. Miss Stephanie's nose quivered with curiosity. She wanted to know who gave us all permission to go to court. She didn't see us, but it was all over town this morning that we were in the colored balcony. Did Atticus put us up there, sort of? Wasn't it right close up where with all those? Did Scott understand all the? Didn't it make us mad to see our daddy beat? Hush, Stephanie. Miss Maudie's diction was deadly. I've got all the morning to pass on this porch. Jem Finch, I called to find out. What's that?
That's Kristen.
Where from?
I don't know.
Okay. I don't even know what to do with that. I've not got all morning to pass on this porch. Jem Finch, I called you to find out if your colleagues can eat some cake. Got up at 5 to make it, so you better say yes. Excuse me, Stephanie. Good morning, Mr. Avery. There was a big cake and 2 little ones on Miss Maudie's kitchen table. There would have been 3 little ones. It was not like Miss Maudie to forget Dill, and we must have shown it, but we understood when she cut from a big cake and gave a slice to Jem. As we ate, we sensed that it was Miss Maudie's way of saying that as far as she was concerned, nothing had changed. She sat quietly in a kitchen chair watching us. Suddenly she spoke. Don't front, Jem. Things are never as bad as they seem. Indoors, when Miss Maudie went to say something lengthy, she spread her fingers on her knees and settled her bridge work. This she did, and we waited. I simply want to tell you that there are some men in this world who are born to do unpleasant jobs for us. Your father's one of them. Oh, said Jem. Well. Don't you oh well me, sir, Miss Maudie replied, recognizing Jem's fatalistic noises. You are not old enough to appreciate what I said. Jem was staring at his half-eaten cake. It's like being a caterpillar in a cocoon, that's what it is, he said. Like something asleep wrapped in a warm place. I always thought Makeham's folks were the best folks in the world. At least that's what it seemed like. We're the safest folks in the world, said Miss Maudie. We're so rarely caught on to be Christians, but when we are, we've got men like Atticus to go for us. Jem grinned ruefully. Wish the rest of the county thought that. You'd be surprised how many of us do. Who? Jem's voice rose. Who in this town did one thing to help Tom Robinson? Just who? His color friends for one thing, and people like us, people like Judge Taylor, people like Heck Tate. Stop eating and start thinking, Jem. Did it ever strike you that Judge Taylor naming Atticus to defend that boy was no accident? That Judge Taylor might have had reasons for naming him? This was a thought. Court-appointed defenses were usually given to Maxwell Green, Makeham's latest addition to the bar, who needed the experience. Maxwell Green should have had Tom Robinson's case. You think about that, Miss Maudie was saying. It was no accident. I was sitting there on that porch last night waiting. I waited and waited to see you come back down that sidewalk, and as I waited, I thought, Atticus Finch won't win. He can't win, but he is the only man in these parts who can keep a jury out so long on a case like that. And I thought to myself, well, we're making a step. It's just a baby step, but it's a step. It's all right to talk like that. Can't any Christian judges and lawyers make up for heathen juries, Jem muttered. soon as I get grown. That's something you'll have to take up with your father, Miss Maudie said. We went down to Miss Maudie's cool new steps into the sunshine and found Mr. Avery and Miss Stephanie Crawford still at it. They had moved down to the sidewalk and were standing in front of Miss Stephanie's house. Miss Rachel was walking down with them. I think I'll be a clown when I get grown, said Dill. Jem and I stopped in our tracks. You, sir, a clown, he said. There ain't one thing in this world I can do about folks except laugh, so I'm going to join a circus and laugh my head off. You got it backwards, Dill, said Jem. Clowns are sad. It's the folks that laugh at them. Well, I'm going to be a new kind of clown. I'm going to stand in the middle of the ring and laugh at folks. Just look yonder, he pointed. Every one of them ought to be riding broomsticks. Miss Aunt Rachel does. Miss Stephanie and Miss Rachel were waving wildly at us in a way that did not give the lie to Dill's observation. Oh, gosh, breathed Jem. I reckon it'd be ugly not to see him. Something was wrong. Mr. Avery was red in the face from sneezing spell and nearly blew us off the sidewalk when we came up. Miss Stephanie was trembling with excitement, and Miss Rachel caught Dill's shoulder. You get on in the backyard and stay there, she said. There's a danger coming. What's the matter? I asked. Ain't you heard yet? It's all over town. At that moment, Aunt Alexander came to the door and called us, but it was too late. It was Miss Stephanie's pleasure to tell us. This morning, Mr. Bob Yule stopped Atticus on the post office corner, spat in his face, and told him he'd get him if it took him the rest of his life. All right. You guys are caught up on the reading, so if you made it all the way to the end of the video, you're good. If we don't have school tomorrow, I'll actually do another one of these so we can get the reading done tomorrow as well. We are almost done. We are actually, I think, less than 100 pages from being done. All right. So have a great night, and I will see you guys tomorrow.